Greetings. Today we descend into an overlooked piece of sci-fi horror, Doom, a film that's taken plenty of hits over the years. Yet once you dig beneath the surface, the truth isn't nearly as grim as the critics make it seem. So let's grab our gear and jump straight in.
DOM 2005 isn't as bad as you remember.
In 2005, a video game was made called Doom, and critics were merciless. The Doom movie was heavily criticized due to its lack of originality and that there was too much dialogue for a mindless killing. Due to those issues, the movie sits at a low 34 out of 100 on Metacritic. The movie did so bad in the public's eyes to the point where it is ranked among Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's weakest roles. All these various criticisms framed Doom as a misguided entry in both video games, adaptation history, and Johnson's film career. It is also important to note that the film diverges significantly from the tone and style of the original 3 Doom games, operating almost entirely within its own distinct genre. Other critical issues are shown from critics like Jeff Keane, who in his New Hollywood Cinema, an introduction in 2002, discussed how high effect drive films, which described Doom, usually prioritize spectacle over narrative coherence, as the plot of the Doom movie is one of its biggest issues. A different narrative-filled issue comes from game culture, video games, and the cultural logic of reproductions, with Whalen arguing that video games adaptations are lacking originality and reduce interactive experiences to shallow movie imitations. This criticism, much like the former criticism, applies to Doom as it failed to try to mimic game mechanics without storytelling. My hot take, if you couldn't already tell, goes against that narrative completely. I argued that the Doom movie made in 2005, while flawed, is far better film than it is represented, especially with the historical context of the Doom game at the time. Doom was known for its darker tone and more horror-like gameplay. Furthermore, I strongly suggest that Johnson's portrayal of Sarge stands as his most effective performance. As in the film, he is portrayed as a physically commanding character that foreshadows his pure dominance in action cinema. This is far from the misstep that his role in the movie is usually labeled, as it reflects the early attempt to merge video games and their mechanics with the movie form, making it a misunderstood artifact of 2000s film history.
The Doom game at the time.
To first understand this stance, we must look into the context of the game that this movie takes heavy influence from. Doom 3 was a complete turn from the regular style that Doom had beforehand, as classic Doom was known for being a first-person shooter with arcade-style looks. However, with the making of Doom 3, the game turned from being an arcade-like shooter to a more horror-like game that requires the player to rely only on noises and rapid fire. The demons, which were the enemies in all Doom games, also took a huge change in the game, mimicking the gameplay by turning grittier. Other things that the horror like Doom 3 added was a darker and grittier backscene that projects a darker atmosphere. In a historical conclusion, Doom 3 was a darker and more horror-like game, which shows that the Doom movie was not a failure, but rather a change from the usual genre that Doom was associated with. This single piece of context explains why the movie feels so different from both modern and classic Doom. The film was shaped by the direction of the most recent game at the time, which leaned heavily into horror, pushing the movie toward a darker, more atmospheric style. If the film had been based on the classic entries Doom, Doom 2, or Doom 64, it would have looked completely different. Even so, the movie still stands as a solid and enjoyable adaptation. The Rockin' Sarge. Much of the popular disdain for Doom extends to Johnson's performance, often cited as one note. I argue quite the opposite, that in the universe of Doom, the performance shown by The Rock is both committed and accurate to the hardened Sarge from the Doom 3 game based on Thomas Kelly, who, just like the character shown in the movie, has a gradual moral decay, but unlike the game has a demonic corruption as a cause. In the movie, he changes due to his character arc as he is pushed against an almost virus-like demon expand. Johnson's character also expanded on the Sarge's character. As in the movie, the moral character of Sarge changed from a commander to a cold-blooded killer. Johnson also leaned into the material's absurdity, as he delivered deadpan one-liners that not only were comical, but fit the dark tone the movie was going for. Johnson, throughout the film, portrayed a pitch-perfect, intense, commanding character without falling into parody, and showed a movie-accurate representation of this Sarge shown in the game that the movie inspired. The Doom character. In the movie, one character overlooked in most discussions of Doom 2005 is the Doomsayer, a figure who appears briefly yet embodies the film's thematic shift toward horror. In the game, the Doomsayer is little more than a grim warning made flesh, a traumatized survivor whose only function is to foreshadow the terror that awaits. His fragmented speech, gaunt appearance, and haunted mannerisms are meant to reflect the psychological collapse caused by the demonic outbreak. In short, the Doomsayer represents the pure atmospheric fear that Doom 3 embraced, an ambiguous, almost symbolic presence rather than a fully developed character. The movie adaptation, however, expands the Doomsayer's role far more than the game ever intended, giving him extended dialogue, clearer motivations, and a more human backstory. Instead of functioning as a silent omen of doom, he becomes a character weighed down by guilt, fear, and scientific knowledge of the Ark experiments. This attempt to humanize him does add emotional texture. It positions the Doomsayer as a victim rather than simply a warning mechanism, and in doing so, the film tries to ground the horror in human vulnerability rather than supernatural ambiguity. Yet this very expansion arguably weakens the archetype. The Doomsayer was most effective when he was quiet, fragmented, and mysterious, when he symbolized fear rather than explained it. By giving him a fuller voice, the film traded atmospheric horror for clarity, diluting the eerie, minimalist tension that Doom 3 mastered. In many ways, the Doomsayer should have remained a silent or near-silent figure, preserving the unsettling ambiguity that made him iconic in the first place. Despite the film's departures from the original games, the portrayal of John Reaper Grimm still preserves the core identity of Doomguy in meaningful ways. Throughout the movie, Reaper maintains the same quiet intensity, emotional restraint, and unshakable determination that defined the Doom protagonist across the franchise. Even though the film gives him more backstory and dialogue, his characterization retains the intimidating, stoic energy that made Doomguy iconic. When confronted with demonic threats, Reaper responds with a mixture of tactical precision and primal ferocity, echoing the unstoppable force players recognize from the games. His transformation in the final act, where he becomes stronger, faster, and brutally efficient, evokes the same power fantasy central to Doom's legacy. In this way, the movie keeps the spirit of the scary, relentless Doom guy alive, proving that even within a more narrative-driven adaptation, the essence of the character can remain intact. The critics. Critics often cite Doom as a reason why video game movies fail, but scholar research goes against such a narrative. Linda Hutcheon, in A Theory of Adaptation, says that when a story moves into one medium to another, like from a game to movie, it can't be an exact copy, and it has to change. As video games gives control to the player, while movies take that feeling away, and in return, they are different experiences. Hutcheon also adds that this is why many games-based movies struggle, as they can't turn the active experience of playing into the experience of watching a film. While many critics argue that Doom 2005 failed because it strayed too far from its video game roots, INSTREAM trade press reactions reveal that expectations were always set unfairly high. Variety described the film as an exercise in B-movie aesthetics, designed more to capitalize on a brand than to develop narrative depth, pointing to how its existence was less about storytelling, more about franchise exploitation. Similarly, The Hollywood Reporter noted that while the first-person shooter sequence was innovative, it ultimately came across as gimmicky rather than groundbreaking. These assessments shaped the popular opinion that the film was unnecessary. However, my hot take suggests that the very elements dismissed by the trades, the stylized action, shallow characters, and the self-aware B-movie flair are what make Doom a unique artifact in film history, foreshadowing the current trend of campy, hyper-stylized video game adaptations. Additionally, J. David Bolter and Richard Grueson's idea of remediation in Remediation, Understanding New Media, helps redefine Doom 2005. Their argument claims that adaptations do not fail simply because they change a story. Instead, they experiment with translating the look and feel of one medium into another. Taking this view into account, Doom's first-person sequence and horror atmosphere reflect an attempt to change the darker tone of Doom 3 into cinematic-friendly form, making the film less a failure and more of a bold move of game dynamics and form. Why does this matter? Why does this hot take matter for film history? Calling Doom just a failure ignores its place in how movies and video games influence each other. The negative reviews also show that critics often look down on fun, action-packed movies and franchise films, which affects how popular cinema is valued. By rethinking Doom, we can see that movies don't have to be serious to be interesting. The film also shows an important step in Johnson's career. Before he became a huge Hollywood star, he used films like Doom to try out roles that mixed action with character work. Understanding this helps us see how he grew as an actor, and how even so-called formula films can include ideas. Conclusion. In conclusion, Doom 2005 isn't a perfect movie, and it shares the problems many early video games films had. However, calling it a total failure ignores how bold and creative it really was. Coming right after the horror-filled Doom 3, the movie tried to capture the creepy, tense feeling of the game while turning it into something cinematic.